Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So it is July 3rd, 2025 in Wellington, New Zealand, and we're going to be reading from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 9, Chapter 24, Text 60 and 61. Karman apari meyani manasyapi sureshvarai saha sankarshanas chakre Bhagavan Madhusudana. Karmani, activities, aparimeyani, immeasurable, unlimited, manasa api, even by such plans perceived within the mind, sura ishwarai, by the controllers of the universe like Brahma and Shiva, saha sankarshana, along with Sankarshana Baladeva. Chakre, performed. Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Madhusudanaha, the killer of the Madhu demon. Srila Prabhupada's translation. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, with the cooperation of Sankarshana Balaram, performed activities beyond the mental comprehension of even such personalities as Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva. For instance, Krishna arranged the battle of Kurukshetra to kill many demons for the relief of the entire world. There's no purport. We're going to go on to 61. Kalo janis yamananam dukkha shoka tamonudam anugrahaya bhaktanam supunyam vyatano dasha. Srila Prabhupada's translation. To show causeless mercy to the devotees who would take birth in the future, in this age of Kali. That's us. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, acted in such a way that simply by remembering him, one will be freed from all the lamentation and unhappiness of material existence. In other words, he acted so that all future devotees, by accepting the instructions of Krishna consciousness stated in Bhagavad Gita, could be relieved from the pangs of material existence. Srila Prabhupada's purport. The Lord's activities of saving the devotees and killing the demons, parichanaya sadhunam vinashaya tajuskritam, Bhagavad Gita 4:8, take place side by side. Krishna actually appears for the deliverance of the sadhus or bhaktas, but by killing the demons, he shows them mercy also, for anyone killed by Krishna is liberated. Whether the Lord kills or gives protection, he is kind to both the demons and the devotees. Kalo janis yamana nam dukkha shoka tamo nudam anugrahaya bhaktanam supunyam vyatano dyashaha. To show causeless mercy to the devotees who would take birth in the future in this age of Kali, the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna acted in such a way that simply by remembering him, one will be freed from all the lamentation and unhappiness of material existence. So Krishna is coming to show who he is. It's one of the reasons he appears, as Prabhupada says, to give information to all the people who don't know who is God. So the majority of people, statistically speaking, on the planet are theists. So the overwhelming majority of people, if you say, do you believe in God? They will say yes. And then depending on how you word it, you'll get even more people. If you'll say, do you believe that there's some sort of divine energy, some sort of divine being, there's some sort of intelligence behind the creation, then you'll get even people who don't like the word God will say yes. And the vast majority of people will say yes. But then if you ask them, who is God? What does he do? What's his nature? You will get a blank. Right? So I've told this story a few times. So I was visiting Bahrain with my grandson, Devesha. Some of you remember I brought Devesha here also? So we went to the Grand Mosque in Bahrain, not to be confused with the Grand Mosque in Abu Dhabi, which is really very grand indeed. The Grand Mosque in Abu Dhabi is definitely worth seeing if you're in that area. So the Grand Mosque in Bahrain is not quite as grand. And in Abu Dhabi, you don't get any proselytizing, any Islamic proselytizing, but in Bahrain, as part of the free tour, you get proselytized. So we first sat down with I assume, someone who was expert in Islam, and she was talking to us, I don't know, at least a half an hour about Islam. And she's telling us quite a few interesting things. One thing is that she said that reincarnation can't be true because there's no beginning and there's no end to it. So I said to her, if you want to defeat other philosophies, you should know something about them. I said, everyone who teaches reincarnation teaches at least that there's an end, and most teach that there's a beginning. But another interesting thing, the most interesting thing she said, was that God is so different from this world, that the world is so different from God, and God is so different from the world, that he cannot come here. She said, we don't accept avatars. And so, I didn't want to embarrass her in front of the other guests. But afterwards, she came up and she was talking to me. I mean, the one thing I did say in front of everyone else is that that's not actually the philosophy of reincarnation. But afterwards, she came up and was talking to me. And I said, are you actually interested to hear something about Avatar? And she said, sure. Obviously, she was interested so she could defeat it better in the future. And I'm sure that was just like many years ago, I gave a class to these Christian ministers who were getting a master's degree in theology at the Southern Baptist University in the United States. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with Southern Baptists, but they're the most heavy-duty proselytizing, born-again evangelical branch of Christianity. Maybe not as persistent as the Jehovah's Witnesses, but a little bit more like we're the only way sort of people. So the reason that they were studying world religions was so that they could be more effective missionaries. That was the purpose in their studying world religions. But their professor, who I think has since passed away, was actually very favorable to Krishna consciousness. And one time he brought them to the temple for a program, and another time I went to their seminary. So again, they don't really know who is God. Like, who is God? Can he come here? What is his nature? At least the Christians have some idea of Jesus as God. So they have some idea that Jesus looks in a particular way, although no one's quite sure what he looked like, and acts in a particular way, something, right? Whereas the Muslims, it's just completely blank. They don't know anything. You say, what does God look like? I don't know. What does he do? He creates the world. Okay, is that like all he does? Just creates the world? I remember getting a Christian tract years ago when I was out on book distribution. The Christians like, here, take one of our things. And it just showed this faceless, gigantic man, clearly wearing like a business suit, in this huge throne. And the humans were ant-sized compared to him. They were like really at the base of this throne. And there was a big screen behind him showing, this is your life kind of thing. And you're looking at your life. Oh no, he saw me do that. And then he was just saying, all right, heaven over here, hell over here. It was like a little cartoon comic. And like, that's all God does all day. Can you imagine that? I mean, even in this world, the judges want to go home and relax. Right? We were talking about that, right? Even the people who are, okay, you're free, you go to jail. They don't want to do that 24/7, even if they like their work. They want to go home. They want to putz around in their garden and play with their kids. So what does God do? They have no idea. And I was raised in a Jewish family, and one of my sisters ended up marrying a very Orthodox rabbi, which made her renounce her connection with me. They consider if anyone like marries outside of the faith or takes up another faith, they're dead. Kind of like what the Amish do. So I was shunned. But when her oldest son died, I did call her. And I took the opportunity to kind of open a door, and we talked for a long time. So by that time, she'd been strictly practicing super Orthodox Judaism for 10 years. And I said to her, so how do you describe God? And she said, well, I'm kind of new and I really can't say. She said, you'll have to talk to an expert rabbi about this. I don't know. And I thought, wow, like 3 days in the Hare Krishna movement and you can describe God. So Krishna comes to show who he is. I mean, we do respect that if anyone's in a bona fide faith, that Krishna can reveal themselves to him or her. I once spoke to this man who came to the temple. He was a teacher of Buddhism. He taught Vipassana meditation, and he'd been a teacher for 20 years. And of course, they tell you there is no God. And he said after 20 years, while he was in deep meditation, he actually saw a vision of Krishna playing with his cowherd friends in the spiritual world. And so he came to the temple, and he's like, that wasn't supposed to happen. So, I mean, it is a fact that in any tradition, if someone is sincere, Krishna can reveal himself. If you read, John V. Harrison years ago suggested that I read St. Teresa of Avila's work on the interior mansions, and she definitely is in Madhurya Bhav, probably Sakya rather than Parakya, but there's no doubt that St. Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross were experiencing Madhurya Bhav, although they were persecuted in Catholicism for teaching like this. St. John of the Cross says there must be romanticism in God because there's romantic attraction everywhere in this world. How could it be everywhere in this world if it doesn't exist in God? Eventually they were both made doctors of the church, but initially they were persecuted. And St. Teresa was exhibiting all these ecstatic symptoms, and her confessor priest told her, this is all of the devil. Whatever kind of meditation you're doing, you should immediately stop. So we're very fortunate that we know who is God. Again, although we do say that anyone in any tradition can approach the Lord, that's certainly possible if you're a sincere practitioner of any tradition. It's a lot easier if you know where you're going. You understand? I mean, we're also very heavily dependent on mercy and revelation. We can't force our way into the kingdom of God. But we have a very clear idea who is God. And Krishna wants people to know who he is. He's not trying to keep himself a hidden secret. Therefore, Krishna and Balaram come. And they come over and over again. So people can know who is God, what's his address? What's his nature? What does he do? Yes? So they want to show that God is wonderful and personal. And all these activities are blessing and benedicting us. And they especially come to please the devotees and also to free us from the ignorance of this world. They're actually kind to us. So Krishna comes to show us his activities, and he says, if you understand them, janma karma tame divyam evam yo veti tatvata tvakta punarjanma naitimam eti sorjuna. And it's interesting, of course, that sounds very easy. Again, you just hang around the devotees for a few days and you'll know that Krishna's birth and activities are transcendental. Of course, he says, evam tatvataha. So to have some realization, not just be able to parrot it. Sometimes we have Shastra studies where you just have a multiple choice exam. Are Krishna's birth and activities transcendental? Yes or no? Okay. That's your entrance exam for the kingdom of God. So there is some actual realization of the transcendental nature of Krishna's activities. Now, having said about all these religions who don't know God, you also have all these scholarly people who look at what's in the Vedic literature and grossly misinterpret it, right? Which is, I'm sure, one of the reasons that most of these religions just don't know anything about God at all, because some acharya in their line at some point said people are committing offenses, let's just not tell them about it. Like even in name of God. So in the way that the Old Testament was written in Hebrew was without vowels. If you're expert in reading Hebrew, you read it without vowels. The vowels are diacritic symbols over and under the letters. And you just can imagine that if you could just read the consonants of a word, right? You could figure it out. But what that means is that if a word isn't openly pronounced over time, people forget what vowels go with it. So that's what happened to the name of God, YHWH. It's just vowels. And no one knows how to pronounce it. So it used to be the people in general would pronounce it, and then it got to be only the priests were allowed to pronounce it, and then it got to be only the high priest, and then it got to be the high priest only once a year on the most sacred days that they could pronounce the name in a special part of the altar that no one else could go to. And eventually nobody remembered how to pronounce it anymore. So whenever it appears in a Hebrew prayer, they just substitute the word Lord or the word God for that. They don't actually try to say the name. And they'll say, blessed be your name, but what's your name? I don't know what your name is. So it was hidden because someone said, well, people are committing offenses. Imagine if we said, well, okay, everybody, you're all committing some offenses and you're chanting. So we're just not going to allow you to chant anymore. So that's what happened. Or you're offending the deity, we'll just put the deities away. You won't be able to worship them anymore. So these things became hidden. And people do still give all kinds of crazy interpretations of Krishna's activities, correct? Like especially in India, but it happens sometimes outside of India. People pretend to be God and have their own so-called Ras Leela with other men's wives. And I'm sure we've all heard of bogus gurus who, say that, oh, you're going to achieve spiritual realization through an illicit relationship with me, right? You've all heard of these people, correct? It's even happened in our Hare Krishna movement, by the way. So there are people who do this kind of thing. Yeah. Or one time when I was visiting my mother, she had me stay in the apartment above her. Those people were out of town, so they let me use their apartment. And the person who owned the apartment had a son who was a professor of religion. And he had a book on their coffee table about Krishna. And I got very excited. Oh, here's a book about Krishna. And as I started reading it, I became more and more nauseated rather than excited. He's just explaining Krishna as if he's some morally degraded person who somehow or other got worshipped as God. So even though Krishna comes and shows himself, if we don't hear through the acharyas, we're not actually going to understand. Like Prabhupada talks about how when Krishna says manmana bhavamad bhakto, which he says twice in the Bhagavad Gita, that some commentator said, well, that's not really Krishna. It's the unborn, unmanifested within Krishna. But that's so absurd, right? If I said, why don't you write me a letter? And you say, well, I know that Urmila doesn't really want me to write her a letter. She wants me to write a letter to the unmanifested being within her. This is what they were saying. So when Krishna says things like, not matta partaram nanyat kinchidaste janandaya, mai saramidam potam sutra manigana eva, that I am the supreme thing. There's nothing higher than me. They'll take it, he's speaking metaphorically in some. And Krishna says, Brahmano hi pratistaham, amritasya vyascha, shaspatasya jajamasya, sukasya kantikasya cha. I am the basis of the Brahman. But people think, well, the Brahman is superior. They don't really understand him. But actually, God is a person. Now, even from a logical point of view, God's got to be ultimately personal. We don't find that impersonal energies create things. Even very simple things, like this glass is a very simple object. It's not a complex object. But I feel relatively certain that this was created by a whole complex process by intelligent beings, right? Or, the very simple pencil, not a mechanical pencil, like this is a simple wooden pencil with graphite in the middle. Google it sometime. How are they made? It's a whole international thing. The wood comes from one place and the graphite from another, and the eraser, do you call them erasers or rubbers at the end? rubbers. The rubber at the end and how it's put together and how they're painted is a whole big complex thing of international trade. But it's a pretty simple thing. And if you're going to take something complicated like a one-celled living being, how could you say, and it's so complicated, there's no scientist or group of scientists that fully understand one living cell. So how could that be created by an impersonal force? I've never had an impersonal force create a pencil, right? I mean, even if you put all the ingredients for a prep in your kitchen, you can try it sometime. Just put all the ingredients for a prep on your kitchen counters and just like blow a fan at it and see if it creates something, you know, or the scientists with it explodes. So we used to have a skit, a radio skit, you know, that new construction company, we're going to put all the construction ingredients in a vacant lot and set off some dynamite, and that's how we're going to build your house. You know, it's absurd. And another reason we can understand that God is a person is that of all the living beings in all recorded history who claim to have seen God, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people in all different traditions who claim to have seen God, their descriptions are not exactly the same. Right? Somewhat different. It's explained by our acharyas when Krishna married 16,100 queens simultaneously. By the way, his relatives also expanded to be in all 16,100 weddings simultaneously. Liberated jivas can do that, just by the way. Imagine if you could be in 16,100 places at once doing different things in different forms. So each queen saw Krishna somewhat differently. Srila Sanatana Goswami talks about when Lord Brahma comes back and sees the cowherd boys and the calves have transformed into Vishnu forms, and they're all being worshipped by unlimited living entities. And Srila Sanatana Goswami says that the Lord has unlimited qualities, and there are unlimited jivas, and each jiva likes a particular quality. And Lord Brahma says that the Lord manifests the form in which the devotee worships him. Srila Sanatana Goswami describes in Śrīmad Bhagavatam how there are residents of Vaikuntha that have a variety of forms like the form of the Lord they worship. So there are devotees who have a half man, half lion form because they really want to worship Lord Nrsingadev. So they have that form. And of course, then they can have another form doing something else, some other place. So the only experience we have of something that appears differently to everyone is a person, right? If you were going to describe this microphone, we could all describe this microphone exactly the same. Right? You're going to buy something online and there's a description. What's the dimensions? What's the color? How much does it weigh? There's a photograph, and everybody can get it and everybody can measure it and weigh it and come out with the same thing. But if I ask all of you to describe Krishna Loka, it's all going to be different. You're all going to describe her somewhat differently. Am I correct? Because you have a different relationship. And we have different relationships with different people who know us in different contexts. I was just hearing Prabhupada talk about Durga Devi, Maya Devi. He said Maya Devi has one relationship with her master, Krishna, and another relationship with the living entities who are like her children. He said, just like a wife has one relationship with her husband, a different relationship with her children. So the only way to explain the fact that there are all these different religious systems and people have different understandings of God is that God must be a person. So from whatever logical point of view you want to go at it, he must be a person. And if everything's coming from him, how could things exist here? Janmayasya yataha, everything's coming from Krishna. Even the other scriptures of the world say this, everything's in the image of God. How could there be something here that's not within him? So he must have some form of whatever activities we have here. It must exist in some form, in some way. The relationships, the activities. Of course, we can't imagine in what way, You know, and the impersonalists are going to say, well, my activities and relationships here have pain associated with them. Sometimes they're only painful. Sometimes people have relationships that are just 100% pain. But even in our relationships that are very sweet and wonderful, there's some pain, yes? I don't think we can have any relationship that has no suffering. And all of our activities have some suffering. You want to have a wonderful picnic out in the park, but then you have to do some austerities. You have to have the money to buy the ingredients, so that means you have to have work to make the money. Or if you don't have a job, you have to do the austerities of farming and weeding. And there's some austerities to get that food. It doesn't just appear in your picnic basket. And then to prepare it, and then you have to have a way of getting to your picnic location, right? There's some austerity connected with it. So the impersonalists say, well, God just has no activities because he couldn't have activities like ours. But why couldn't he have the perfect form of the activities? Why couldn't this be a reflection? And his activities, therefore, are full of all pleasures. I mean, I really like, one of my favorite parts of Prabhupada's books is the preface to the Nectar Devotion, where Prabhupada says that everything we do is motivated by a desire for pleasure. And I find that that's hard for a lot of us to accept because we have a tendency to do things that we know are not going to be good for us. Am I correct? Yes, I'm not the only one who suffers from this problem. So when I first read that in the Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna says, why do we do things that we know are wrong? He says, and it seems like we're forced to do them. Doesn't it feel like that? You don't really feel like you have a choice to eat that extra dessert or to say that gossipy thing or whatever, waste your time doom scrolling, whatever it is that we're doing that we know we shouldn't be doing and we know isn't good for us. And we feel almost impelled by it. And Arjuna says, why does it seem like that? And Krishna says, well, it's just your own lust. Right? And so it's very hard for us to understand that everything we're doing is motivated by pleasure. Because we're thinking, well, I do some things that only bring me pain, and I know they're going to bring me pain, and I do them anyway. But we're looking for some rasa in those things. Like we were talking yesterday about, last night at the program I went to, about, people who get stuck in tamagun, and they're just like, I'm terrible, I'm awful, everything's bad, I can't fix myself. What are they trying to enjoy? They're trying to enjoy karuna ras, which is lamentation. And they're probably also trying to enjoy disgust. I'm so disgusted with myself, I'm a terrible person. But of course, their experience of it is not actually very enjoyable. And people want to enjoy fear. That's why they do extreme sports and go on amusement park rides. Or people want to enjoy sadness by seeing sad movies or things like that. So everything we're doing is trying to enjoy some kind of pleasure. So all of these pleasures must exist in God in a pure form. Because in this world, even when we're trying to enjoy wonder and even when we're trying to enjoy joy and comedy, it's not pure enjoyment, correct? There's some suffering. So he is the form of all pleasures in their pure state, even things like disgust, and even things like fear, and even things like lamentation. Srila Rupa Goswami says that if the Ramayana wasn't pleasurable, why does Hanuman keep reciting it over and over again, even though it's full of tragedy? I mean, for many of us, like we get to Ram, Lakshman, Hanuman getting back to Ayodhya, and we kind of want to stop there. We're like, can we not read the rest of this story, please? But even though it's tragic. It's tragic. I mean, if you really meditate on it, you'll be crying. But it's a rasa, it's a pleasure. And Krishna comes to give us a taste of the spiritual world. He brings his world with him. He brings his entourage with him. So we can actually taste some of these rasas. It shouldn't be just all intellectual. It should be experiential. It's one of the donkey urine baths given in Manashiksha in the commentary by Bhaktivinoda Thakur to verse 6, just being philosophical, not allowing yourself to actually experience bhakti. So we should start to experience some of these rasa, some of these tastes, some of these pleasures of the spiritual world. And Krishna comes to remove all this speculation. You know, God's so different from the world, he can't come here. Or all he does is sit in a big chair sending people to heaven and hell. Or he's just impersonal. He's saying, here I am. Of course, that doesn't work for everybody. Still, people speculate. Have you ever had people speculate about you and not ask you? I always had this really funny thing. So my oldest son and his family, they own a house in Hawaii, and I would visit them regularly. And at one point, he converted half of his carport. You know what a carport is? It's like a garage, but it's not fully enclosed. He converted half of his carport into a room for me. So that's like a little bit more than the size of one van, right? I got to go into the main house to use the bathroom and the shower and the washing machine. I did have a sink in my room. I did have a sink, and I did put a little refrigerator in there. So I posted on social media, you know, I'm now at my place in Hawaii. And then a couple days later, I saw in my news feed, why does Urmila have an oceanfront mansion in Hawaii? And I was thinking, I didn't bother to answer it because they didn't ask me. And I thought, you can see I'm here. Like, why don't you just ask me? And I'll tell you, we're a 10-minute drive from the ocean, and I've got half a carport. Yeah. So it's funny like that. People will speculate about us. Oh, definitely, that's what he's doing, or that's what she's doing, and we're like, hi. You could, and I've had people speculate about me, and I've said to them, well, actually, that's not true, and they'll say, oh, yes, it is. Like, okay. I'll say, you know more about my biography than I do, you know, fine. So this also happens. Krishna shows up and people are like, no, you're not really like that. You're not really doing that. But he's coming to destroy, and we can actually have these records. We have the records of the Bhagavatam. By the way, we can really trust that the Bhagavatam that we have now is the same Bhagavatam that existed in the beginning. And the reason we can do that is that there's been 81 commentaries on the Bhagavatam. And in each of these commentaries, they will quote the verses they're commenting on. You know, they'll quote just like the Bhagavatam we read, where Prabhupada's quoting the verse and giving his commentary. So all the other commentaries do the same thing. Now, there have sometimes been changes in verses. So sometimes there's more than one version of a verse, but then the commentators will note that. I'm sure you've noticed Prabhupada noting that sometimes. He'll say in some versions there's this word instead of this word. Sometimes there's some verses that have been added or subtracted from different versions, and they will note that. Like sometimes Prabhupada will say, in some versions of the Bhagavatam, there's these 2 extra verses that appear at this point in the chapter. Now, just by the way, such is not the case for most of the Puranas and Itihasas. So most of them have 0 commentaries. And so please be very, very careful with quoting things from those scriptures unless our acharyas have quoted from them. And you can quote the verse that our acharyas have quoted from, but that doesn't mean you can trust any of the verses in those because we don't know to what extent they've been changed. You know, the books used to be written by hand. They were copied by hand on leaves that don't last for very long. But we have very firm surety that our Bhagavatam is authentic. Same with the Bhagavad Gita. So that these descriptions of the Lord are actually what happened when Krishna was here. That it's not somebody's speculation. So why does Krishna have all these activities? He has these activities, as said in today's verse, to benefit the conditioned souls. Do we feel benefited by them? I mean, how could we dedicate everything to Krishna if you don't know anything about the Krishna to whom you're dedicating everything to? That actually benefits us. Krishna even benefits those he kills, which Prabhupada mentions in this purport. So sometimes, even in our life, Sometimes Krishna benefits us in ways that seem not so beneficial at the time we're going through them. Am I correct? So we're going through something, or someone we care about is going through something, and at the time we might fail to see how this is actually good for us. I remember going through one, I'm not going to go into the details, but I went through one very heart-wrenching experience when I was very new in the Hare Krishna movement. And I saw it as only negative. I wasn't able to see anything positive in it. And it was 15 years later when other things happened, and I'm like, oh, wow. Krishna was really kind to me that I don't live there anymore. Everything fell apart over there, and I'm not there. Had I stayed in that situation that I was so attached to, that I thought was so important for my Krishna consciousness, it would have been a catastrophe for me and my family. But it took 15 years for me to see that. You know, Krishna knew, but I didn't know. But that experience gave me some faith and conviction that things I'm going through now, or things I've gone through where I don't see what's the benefit, that I will see, that I will come to understand that everything is beneficial. I would guess that when Krishna is in the midst of killing the demon, that while the demon is not yet dead, that they don't really see it as beneficial. That's my reasonable assumption. That when, you know, Nrsingadeva is pulling Hiranyakashipu onto his lap, that Hiranyakashipu is not thinking, great, this is all for my benefit. He's probably not thinking like that. But even it's for his benefit. And not only killing, but correction. Like Kaliya wasn't killed, he was just corrected. And sometimes the devotees also act as Krishna's agents, like the Nalakuvera and Manigriva. They had to be trees for a long time. But it ended up to be a great benediction. Right? And not only does it benefit the demons that Krishna corrects or kills, but it benefits all of us. We were talking about this yesterday, and when Krishna gets the demons to kill each other, then we're in a safer, more secure society. It's hard to function if you're in a society run by demons. I mean, even if many of us may not like our governments very much, we're free to practice Krishna consciousness. That's not always true everywhere in the world. You know, in the former Soviet Union, if just 3 or 4 people got together in a private home to pray, they were at risk of being beaten. There was a book I read many years ago called The Persecutors, about this man who had been part of these groups working with the KGB to beat up believers of any religion, any faith. If they got, you know, any kind of notice that a few people were gathering together to pray and read scripture, they would go and beat them. Their instructions were, don't kill them, but change their faces. The person who wrote the book, he was writing of his own experience. He actually became a deep theist. It's a fascinating book. That book taught me a lot about, that book pretty much started my journey to learning about forgiveness. But, you know, my point is, when you're under a demoniac government, you can't be a religious person. In the Bhagavatam, that was the situation under Vena, where he stopped all the sacrifices, and of course under Hiranyakashipu. So Krishna wants to get rid of these people so people can be not only prosperous materially, demoniac governments also hurt our material prosperity, but so we can prosper spiritually. So Krishna killing the demons, or arranging them to kill each other, is beneficial for the demons and for all of us, because then peace and prosperity is restored. And we read about yesterday how the Kshatriyas, that's one of their duties, is to make sure that people can take up Krishna consciousness. And then, as stated in today's verse, it's to bring us beyond the ignorance of this world, so we can eventually join Krishna's pastimes. Prabhupada said the purpose of our Krishna consciousness movement is so we can join the pleasure dance of Radha and Krishna. We become attracted, and we say, oh, I want to go there. Prabhupada writes in the description of the Kingdom of God section of the Bhagavatam that we should become captivated by this information. Just like people become captivated by reading about New Zealand and want to come here. Right? When I was doing curriculum work in Auckland, and my family, part of my family was in Hawaii, so I flew many times between Auckland and Honolulu. And I'd see people coming to New Zealand from Hawaii. I'm like, why are you going there? They said, it's beautiful. I said, well, it's beautiful right here in Hawaii too. No, why are you going to New Zealand? And it's interesting, I'm going to be visiting one of my sons in California, and 2 days after I leave, they're all going to come to New Zealand. Why? Because they read about it, they hear about it, they see films about it, and they're like, I want to go there. I want to see this beautiful place with all you lovely people. So what to speak of going to the spiritual world? So I hate to inform all of you, but all the places on this planet get kind of boring after a while. Right? I was once on an airline, Turkish Air, and they were showing an advertisement on all the screens. Must have been famous people. Anyway, I think they were famous athletes. And they're showing them in all these cities that they've flown to on Turkish Airlines, you know. You can go to this city. And I thought, yeah, I've been there. You can go to this city. Yeah, I've been there too. You can go to this city. Where I've been. I'm like, nothing left, you know. And everywhere you go, people are eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. They may eat slightly different food or whatever. But Krishna wants us to get captivated by being in the spiritual world, where every step is it's like dancing. Where just walking is so graceful, it looks like dancing. Where just speaking is so melodious, it sounds like singing. The South Indian languages sound a little bit to me like music. And I hear people speaking Kannada and Tamil and Telugu. Those sound very musical to me. But imagine, you know, if people's just, and then how would their singing be? If their talking sounds like singing, how is the singing? If their walking is like dancing, how is the dancing? And it's explained when the gopis are singing that the jeweled platforms that people sit on under the trees, they melt and then they reform in different shapes, and everything is conscious. The houses are conscious. The clothes are conscious. The ornaments are conscious. Everything's a person. Everything's full of life. And there's all rasas, but there's no misery. There is a rasa of fear, and there is a rasa of lamentation. There are these rasas, but they're in the pure form. And one can experience all these rasas simultaneously. Why don't we want to be in that atmosphere? And there's a question I ask myself, you know, why do I want to stay in this material world? For what? What is so attractive to me here that I don't just surrender to Krishna? You know? It's kind of, just talking about them. Majchita magata pranam bodhayantas prasram katayantas tamam nityam tushyanti cha ramanti cha. I think one of our greatest happinesses in the Hare Krishna movement is talking about Krishna and Krishna's pastimes and Krishna's devotees. Isn't that a fact? Yes? Yes? Am I the only one who experiences that? So my favorite service that I've done in the Hare Krishna movement is teaching little children, like ages 1 or 2 to 5. And the reason I really liked it is I could just talk about Krishna. And nobody criticized me. Like it's this sort of funny phenomena sometimes in the Hare Krishna movement. You know, if you go up to another adult and you say, did you know that Krishna killed a Gasur, a demon? They might look at you and say, yeah, I knew that. But, you know, we're teaching little kids and you're like, all right, Krishna's blowing his buffalo horn. Everybody blow their buffalo horn. Ooh. Everybody be a cow. Let's be a cow. Okay, we're walking in the forest. Uh-oh, there's Agasura. You know, and I was doing that for hours every day. It was so much fun. And no one says, are you a Sahajiya, Mother Urmila? It was just pure bliss, you know. And we'd act out dramas and puppet shows. And it's so enlivening to just talk about Krishna. Of course, even when we have to talk about ordinary things like, did you put petrol in the car? And have you paid this bill? And you'll find when you're doing that with devotees, there's this undercurrent of knowing I'm not this body and Krishna is God. It's very sweet. And of course, we should become so expert that even when we're working out in the world at our jobs or our families or driving around, that everything should remind us of Krishna. I taught that last time, right, with Krishna meditations. How everything, you should see the trees. You have so many trees. See the trees as the hairs on Krishna's body. And just, look at a tree and meditate on it and like, wow, maybe this is one of the hairs on Krishna's eyebrow. How fascinating. To actually be in this kind of meditation. And we also get great satisfaction and bliss from attracting conditioned souls to Krishna, isn't that? So I have a godbrother named Bhavananda, and Prabhupada said, do you know what your name means? And he says, yes, it means the bliss of bhav, of emotion for Krishna. And Prabhupada said, yes, but it also means the bliss of coming to bhava, the material world, and preaching. It's very, very satisfying. I think one of the most satisfying things is to take people who are in gross ignorance and help them come to transcendental knowledge. Isn't that satisfying? It's extremely satisfying. So it's satisfying to talk about Krishna with the devotees, and it's very satisfying to bring Krishna to people in general and see people transforming. And when we're enjoying that, Krishna is also enjoying that. Should I tell you a story? I don't know if I've ever told this story. Maybe once or twice I've told the story while being recorded. So I was in Auckland working on curriculum. I was there off and on for 2 years. And when I started, I had no money. I had not really much help. I mean, Dwarkapuri was helping. She would come periodically to help, give me some advice. And Prana Prabhu made an arrangement for me, but I wasn't part of a team. I was working on my own. And I had taught hundreds of kids how to read, but I hadn't created a learn to read curriculum before. And even though I'd taken some courses in it from the Institute of Education, the Government Institute of Education in London, I didn't feel fully confident that I could do it. And it was very complicated. I didn't quite know where to begin. The whole thing was very scary. And I had no hope. I had no hope on a technical level that what I wanted to do would ever be accomplished. On a material level, I didn't have the proper connections for printing and publication. I didn't have the money for it. I made curriculum materials before, but not on this level. So it was basically hopeless. And it was just me and my computer and the cows and the Pukiko birds and the tidal estuary. I got to be very familiar with the tides and the moon when I was there. And I'm like, okay, well, what am I going to do? And I thought, well, and each book was very hard to write, even though they're short books. Try to write a story using only 50 words. That's a real story, and that's about Krishna, and that's fun to read. So it's that kind of a challenge. Thankfully, I like challenges. But anyway, it was very difficult. And what I started doing was offering what I was doing at every moment to Krishna, because I didn't have any hope of it ever getting done at all, like zero. So I would imagine every time I sat down to work on it, I would imagine that the books were completed and that Radha and Krishna and the gopis were looking at them and smiling and laughing. And I made that mental picture over and over and over and over and over and over and over every day as I was working, that this is what I wanted to achieve. So eventually I got help. Eventually I got connected with an artist in New Zealand, and a devotee's offered to pay for the artist. And then I went to Australia and I got connected there with the artist in China through Radhacharan Prabhu. And then one Australian devotee gave me a significant donation. And then I went to China, and it all snowballed, and eventually then a devotee in London introduced me to a publisher, and eventually over 200 people internationally were working on it. And my son was didn't have a job at the time. He said, I'll do the layout for free. So everything just kind of came together in bits and pieces. But still, I was having this mental picture over and over again. And I remember when my son was doing the work, he said, Mata, is this actually going to get printed? And I'm like, I don't know. He said, well, I don't want to do it if it's not going to get printed. I said, I don't know. It was only 2 months before it got printed that we actually got an assurance. The publisher said, we'll finance the printing charge. So then the publisher, the head of the publishing company was Bengali, but not a Vaishnava, a Hindu. And his workers were, most of them were not devotees at all. So he had one of his workers who wasn't a devotee design the covers of the boxes. And we had some photographs of kids looking at, we had done a few like one-off printing in a copy shop of some of the books. So we had some photographs of kids looking at the books. So this box cover designer took the photographs of the kids looking at the books and combined them with illustrations from the books for each of the covers. So we had one book about Srimati Radharani and Chitra Devi called I Look for My Krishna, where they're following Krishna's footsteps and trying to find him in the forest. And eventually they just sit and sing about him. So in one of these pictures, Radha and Chitra have their hands like this, their hands palm up, pointed down, looking down at Krishna's footprints. So this box designer took that picture, along that drawing, along with photographs of kids looking at the books, so that Radha and Chitra are looking at the books. So she brings in this design, and I practically started to cry. I'm like, this was the picture that was in my mind. And it manifested here. Yes. So this pleasure of bringing Krishna consciousness to others, seeing Krishna's hand in our life, seeing how Krishna works in our life, how Krishna is helping us both to develop our own meditation on Krishna and to bring Krishna consciousness to others. Even when things don't seem like they're coming together, even when things seem mysterious or difficult, but to become captivated and enter like that. So questions, comments, additions, subtractions, chastisements. Yes. Yes. Oh, that's very nice. How can we see what goes on in our lives more as an exchange of rasa with Krishna than the material ups and downs? Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur talks about this. He says that the material world is also one of the Lord's leelas. And if we choose to see it that way and exult in it, then we will not experience the world as miserable. So this happens on two levels. One is detachment from the modes, and the other is absorption in Krishna. You need to do both. So detachment from the modes is nicely explained. It's nicely explained in Bhagavad Gita 264 and 265, also to some extent in 270. I really like the description in 1422 to 25. That's one of my favorites. That one who does not hate illumination, attachment, or delusion, that's Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. One who does not hate illumination, attachment, and delusion when they appear, nor long for them when they disappear, knowing that the modes alone are active, always remaining neutral. And Prabhupada in that purport said, as long as we have a material body, the body and mind are going to be affected by the modes. But to remain neutral and go, oh, there's Tamagun. You know, like you walk down the street, you may walk past so many interesting people, but you have your business to go to. Some of the people you walk by may be very attractive. Some of the people you walk by may be very unattractive. You may walk by various animals on the street, probably mostly dogs. And then there's so many things being advertised. But you have your place you're going. You may know that they're there, but you don't engage with them. You just pass by them, let them pass by you, like in 270, like rivers flowing into the ocean. What we generally do is we identify with the modes. We think that's me. Those are my feelings. Those are my desires. And then we either try to indulge them or we try to repress them. That's generally what we do. So we say, oh, that's my desire. I have to fulfill it. Or that's a terrible desire. I'm not going to fulfill it. So that's icha dvesha. We become absorbed in attachment or hatred. So which one should be neutral? Not wanting them, not hating them. Even sattva gun, one who does not hate illumination, attachment, or delusion when they appear, nor long for them when they disappear. Sattva gun is also contaminating. Oh, I'm so spiritual. I'm so detached. I'm so transcendental. I'm sure you deal a lot with people like that in your yoga classes, right? I don't need to chant Hare Krishna. I'm already spiritual. So we want to be detached from that kind of thing, too. And then how do you see Krishna in it? Well, we can start, Prabhupada says, see Krishna as the taste of water. See Krishna as the light of the sun. We have a little sunlight coming in. See Krishna as your ability. Krishna says, I'm the life of all that lives. I was talking to one devotee who was saying, he said, I see my wife, the life of my wife, that's Krishna who's the life of all that lives. If I take care of her, that's my service to Krishna because he's the life of all that lives. Krishna says, among living beings, I'm the living force or consciousness. My consciousness, the consciousness of everyone else I'm dealing with, that's Krishna. My ability to think, my ability to see, that ability is Krishna. So that takes some effort. That's why it's called sadhana bhakti or abhyas yoga. It takes some effort. At a certain point, it doesn't take much effort anymore. Like anything else you get expert at. But this is something you get expert at that's innate and natural to the soul. Prabhupada compares it to a child learning how to walk. So we can become expert at something artificial. You can become expert at something that's not a natural biological function, like a certain form of dancing or playing a certain musical instrument. And you can become so expert at it that it comes effortlessly. You understand? You don't have to think about it anymore. Like when I was trained in public speaking, I had to, memorize, okay, how do you organize a speech and how do you do this? And I don't have to do that anymore. Does that make sense? Yeah. And what to speak of something that's natural? So unless we've recovered from an injury, we don't have to think about how we're walking anymore. We just walk. So at a certain point in bhakti, it comes very naturally. Prabhupada says, starting at nista, said until nista, it's a hard struggle with determination. After that, everything comes very easily. And I compare it to if you guys have ridden bicycles up and down hills, I assume? Most of you? Yes? So if you take the bicycle up a steep hill, sometimes you even have to get up and get off and walk the thing. Or you may have to like stand up on your bicycle so you get the extra push on the pedals and you're working hard and then you get to the top. Hey, you still have to do something. You have to steer, you have to do something with the brakes, but woo, you just woo. But you got there because you had to work hard. So abhyas yoga, you're repeating over and over again. So we're making a deliberate attempt. All right, that's Rajas, I know you. Okay, do whatever you want to do, I don't care. All right, how can I find Krishna in this situation? I mean, one of the easiest things, it's a letter Prabhupada wrote to Jayapataka Swami in 1972, and I refer to this in many of my classes, where he says that everything is according to Krishna's plan, whatever is meant to be, I'm doing that. I'm probably not getting the words exactly correct. Let me do it with full attention to every detail. Let me become fully absorbed in that service, no matter what it is, and all other considerations be forgotten. And let my motive for Krishna's pleasure be my only desire, or something like that. The only thing I desire, my only motive is to please Krishna. So whatever situation I'm in, there's some service for me to do. I don't care what situation it is. You're brushing your teeth, you're talking to a cashier at the store, you're going through an illness, whatever, there's some service, and I'm always a servant. What service does Krishna have for me here? I'm among the several things I'm reading. One of them is the 9th chapter of the 1st canto about Bhishma. And Prabhupada was saying how even though Bhishma's on this bed of arrows, he's still greeting people verbally. And Krishna wanted to show how his devotee could function. And I'm like, oh. The one time I went to China to connect with the artists for the reading program, I got really sick from the pollution, like really, really sick. I ended up going to the hospital and the doctor says, oh, this is from the pollution in the air. Everybody gets this. I'm like, oh, great. And I got so sick. There was a program planned at this devotee's house, but I couldn't even sit up. Like I could barely breathe. I could barely speak. And I said, can we cancel the program? And she's like, well, we can't. People are already coming. And there weren't mobile phones. And, like, okay. So I gave a class lying on the floor. And then when I was reading this, I'm thinking, oh, okay, thanks a lot, Lord. But, Krishna has some service for us to do in every situation. How can I be a servant here, and what service can I do? Now, sometimes our service is to leave the situation. Sometimes the service I can do for Krishna is to get out of there as fast as I can. It's not that just because everything is Krishna's plan, that means I have to stay in that particular situation for the rest of my life. Is that all right? Is that easy? No. Does it get easier? Yes. Is it worth it? Yes. So if you can do it for 2 minutes in one day, celebrate that. Maybe the next day you can do it for 4 minutes. And then celebrate that. Don't look at all the times you didn't do it. Look at when you did do it. Focus on that. And gradually it will happen more and more and more, and gradually it will take you over more and more and more. And gradually all you'll be left with are the really extreme highs and lows. Like you'll think, okay, I'm dealing with everything. Whoa, and then some really intense high or low comes and you're like, whew. Like, okay, I couldn't deal with that one yet. But then that's a learning, and I'm learning, okay, how am I going to deal with this thing? And even the great devotees sometimes with the really extreme things, like Maharaj Yudhishthira, who was depressed after the Battle of Kurukshetra, and Arjuna, who was really angry with the death of Abhimanyu. And there was this one person asking Prabhupada, if Arjuna really heard the Bhagavad Gita, why did he get upset when his son died? Prabhupada said, well, that is natural. So that doesn't mean he didn't hear the Bhagavad Gita. So if the gunas hit you really hard and knock you over before you even had a chance to know they were coming, at least you can say, okay, I got knocked over by the gunas. It's not me. Do you follow? And at least at some point, maybe it's an hour later, or maybe it's a day later, maybe it's a week later, you go, okay, how can I find Krishna there? Is that all right? It's 9:13. So probably I should stop. So thank you very much. Anything good in this presentation is from Srila Prabhupada and the Bhagavatam. Anything bad is from me. Please take the good and please leave aside the bad. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.